Kyoto, Japan, October 8, 1594. The air is thick with the bitter stench of burning wood, yet something else lingers, something far more unsettling. It draws the crowd in, despite the revulsion etched on their faces. You are one of them, standing shoulder to shoulder with peasants and merchants, samurai and servants alike, united not by class, but by a shared, terrible curiosity. At the center of the execution ground sits a monstrous iron cauldron, dark and gaping like a yawning abyss. Wisps of steam drift upward, curling like pale fingers toward the cold autumn sky. Beneath the cauldron, flames crackle and spit as oil within begins to boil. The sound it makes, a slow, sinister bubbling, slips beneath your skin, as if trying to burrow into your bones. Executioners feed the fire with fresh logs. With every added piece of wood, the flames leap higher, casting grotesque shadows across the prisoners who kneeled before the cauldron. One is a man broad-shouldered, even in chains, his black hair clumped with dirt and sweat. The other, a boy no older than 7, shivers beside him. He doesn't tremble from the cold, but from a terror so deep it seems to radiate from his small frame like heat from the cauldron itself. The man is Ishikawa Gomen. The child is his son. In moments, both will be lowered into that boiling tomb, and you, along with the others, will bear witness to a scene that will stain your memory for the rest of your life. A father's final act, born of love and desperation, will become both legend and curse. It will echo far beyond this day. But to understand the cruelty of this moment, you must first walk backward through time into the bloody mist of a fractured Japan. A land torn apart by war, where honor and survival were constantly at odds, and myths were carved into history by blade and fire. Before we delve into this forgotten world of struggle and sacrifice, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden stories behind the past, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I'm always amazed that we can gather together from such distant corners of the earth to reflect on ancient lives and forgotten choices. The year is 1558. Japan is bleeding. This is the Sengoku period, the Warring States era, a time when the land was nothing more than a chessboard for ambitious warlords. They clashed over provinces, pride, and the desperate dream of unifying a divided nation. It is in the heart of this chaos that a child is born. Some would later call him the greatest thief Japan ever knew. Others would remember him as a folk hero, an outlaw shaped by tragedy, admired as much for his cunning as for his defiance. They say his name at birth was Sonata Kuranoshin. Born into a samurai household loyal to the Moshi clan in the province of Iga, his path seemed prewritten, a life of discipline, duty, and death in service of his lord. A life lived and ended by the sword. But fate rarely follows such neat intentions. Imagine him at 15, standing barefoot on blood-soaked floorboards, staring at the broken bodies of his parents. The Ashikaga shogunate had come in the dead of night, ruthless, swift, and without warning. His father, Ishikawa Akashi, had become a target not for betrayal, but for loyalty to the wrong faction in a land where allegiances shifted like drifting sand. Their killers disappeared as quickly as they came, leaving only silence, death, and the lingering stench of spilled lives. In that moment, the boy named Sonata Kuranoshin dies, and in his place, something new emerges, hardened, furious, unforgiving. He vanishes into the wilderness and reappears under the tutelage of Memochi, Sando, one of the most feared shinobi masters of the Iga school. In hidden mountain fortresses, he learns to make shadows his shield and silence his weapon. He becomes fluent in the silent language of death, infiltration, disguise, precision, escape, a ghost in human skin. But even in a life shaped by secrecy and blood, his heart betrays him. They say he fell for a woman, a concubine of his master. Her name is lost to history, but her beauty it's said, could have torn empires apart. When Memochi discovers the affair, the verdict is swift: exile or death. The boy chooses exile. But before he leaves, he steals something sacred, a sword of exquisite craftsmanship, said to glow faintly in the dark as if whispering old truths. A blade his master cherished, a blade that would carry its own curse. And from that moment forward, the boy is no longer just a fugitive. He is legend in the making. It is a crime that marks him forever. Branded as a Nukenin, a runaway shinobi, he becomes a man without clan, without honor, without home. And so, Sonata Kuranishin vanishes into the fog of history. From that very mist, another figure rises. Ishikawa Gomen, a name that, depending on who you were, would either strike terror into your heart or kindle a flicker of hope. For the elite, he was a nightmare. For the poor, a whispered promise. By the late 16th century, the Kansai region has become a land where wealth flows like a river, but only for those clever or cruel enough to dam it. The peasant class survives on crumbs. Merchants grow corpulent on trade, filling their coffers while laborers starve. Samurai lords stockpile treasures like dragons, and the great Buddhist temples become vaults of unimaginable opulence, more gilded palace than place of worship. Into this unequal world steps Gomen, armed not only with blades, but with a radical vision of justice. Picture the scene. Osaka, 1580. The night is starless, the moon absent, a thief's perfect sky. In the heart of the city, a merchant's mansion rests in smug silence. The guards patrol their routes with the lazy assurance of men who've never known fear. Inside, their master slumbers amid cushions of silk and dreams of coin. He is unaware of the shadow sliding across his tiled roof, unaware of the figure that melts through a window without a sound, a wraith in the dark. The merchant wakes not to footsteps, but to the chilling pressure of cold steel against his throat. His eyes open and stare into a face half lit by starlight. The eyes looking down on him burn not with greed, but with something older, deeper: fury, justice. Your wealth or your life, Gomen murmurs, not as a threat, but as a decree. This is not theft, this is balance. And by dawn, the merchant's treasure chests are bare. Yet while Osaka stirs in confusion and fury, something stirs in the countryside too. In quiet hamlets and broken homes, mysterious gifts appear, as if delivered by unseen hands. A satchel of rice on a widow's doorstep, silver coins in the palm of a crippled beggar, medicines for a fevered child, paid for with stamped gold unmistakably linked to the plundered merchant. No one sees who brings these gifts. No one asks. They only whisper one name. And that is how legends take root. Not in palaces or councils of war, but in the quiet aftermath of rebellion, in the rice sack left on a stranger's doorstep, the coin slipped into a beggar's hand. That is where the legend of Giman takes root. He and his band phantoms in the night strike with precision and disappear like smoke. The rich wake to find their vaults empty. The poor wake to find their hunger, just for a moment, eased. The people begin to whisper his name, not with fear, but with awe. Here at last is someone who understands them. Someone who risks everything to tilt the scales of a world that has long leaned in favor of the powerful. Children grow up on bedtime tales of a noble thief who robs from the rich to feed the poor. And in those tales, Giman becomes more than flesh and blood, he becomes myth. Justice itself, cloaked in shadows. But legends are dangerous things. They inspire, they provoke, and they threaten those who have much to lose. As Giman's name grows in the alleyways and marketplaces, another name ascends in court halls and battlefields. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Like Giman, he was born into nothing, a son of peasants. But where Giman vanishes into darkness, Hideyoshi climbs toward the light, one rung at a time, with ambition as sharp as any blade. He becomes a master of war, a tactician of charm and steel. His tools are not stealth and sabotage, but armies, alliances, and unyielding strategy. Both men rise from dust. Both command deep loyalty. Both are self-made in a land that honors birthright. But they are opposites in purpose. Jimon seeks to take from the hoarders and return what was stolen. Hideyoshi seeks to control, to unify, to build an order where only one voice matters his own. By 1582, after the death of his mentor Oda Nobunaga, Hideyoshi begins his swift march toward dominion. He subdues rival daimyo through war and diplomacy, weaving together the fragments of a shattered nation. By the early 1590s, he stands atop a new Japan, one that hasn't known peace for generations. But Hideyoshi knows that peace is fragile. Peace must be enforced. It must be made sterile and safe, scrub it of all defiance. And in the shadows of this new order, Ishikawa Goemon remains a symbol too dangerous to tolerate a rogue, a rebel, a romantic threat to the authority Hideyoshi is trying to solidify. He must be erased. Because as long as one man believes that conscience can triumph over power, the war for Japan's soul is not over. The inevitable confrontation does not arise from some grand strategy or military maneuver. It begins, as so many tragedies do, with a personal loss won that turns political defiance into a blood vendetta. Goemon's wife, Otaki renowned for a beauty said to rival even the court ladies, is taken by Hideyoshi's men. Some say she was executed as punishment for her husband's defiance. Others whisper that she died shielding their son from capture. But in truth, the details scarcely matter. What matters is the fire her death lights in Gaiman's heart. The thief who once found purpose in robbing the rich to feed the poor now burns with a deeper hunger. Not for gold, not for balance, for vengeance. Fushimi Castle, Kyoto, September 1594. The fortress rises like a crown of white stone above the hills, its walls gleaming beneath the autumn moon. Inside sleeps the most powerful man in Japan Toyotomi Hideyoshi cradled in a web of guards. Gates and gilded walls designed to be impenetrable. But Gaiman has built his life on penetrating the impossible. He moves through the shadows like smoke, silent and certain. The skills passed down by his master, Momochi Sandayu, guide his every step. He slips past the guards without sound, weaving through corridors like a breeze no one feels until it's gone. He ascends stairwells with the patience of a monk and the precision of a blade. At last, he reaches the innermost chamber, the private quarters of the man who shaped an empire. The room is humbler than expected. No golden screens or elaborate carvings, just a simple futon. And on it, Hideyoshi, this peasant who became a ruler, sleeps soundly, unaware of the death standing above him. Goemon watches him. In slumber, Hideyoshi seems smaller. The wrinkles of power soften. His breath is steady, untroubled. Here lies the man who tamed the warring states, who brought peace to a bleeding land, but did so through fire, sword, and ruthless control. Goemon's hand tightens around the hilt of his blade, the same sword he stole years ago, the same sword that led him down this path of rebellion and legend. It gleams now in the moonlight, filtering through a lattice window, casting silver light across its edge. The blade hums softly, as if aware of what it is about to do. One swift stroke, and the tyrant would be gone. Japan, perhaps, would wake free. Otaki would be avenged. Goemon raises the sword, but fate, as always, intervenes. His foot brushes against the corner of a lacquered table, small, ornamental, seemingly unimportant. On it rests a bronze ceremonial bell. It tumbles. The sound that follows is not loud by the standards of war, but in the stillness of the moment, it roars like a thunderclap. Metal against wood. A clang that shatters the silence, like glass. Hideyoshi stirs. The moment is lost. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. From concealed alcoves, Guards surge into the room with swords already drawn, their armor whispering death with every movement. Hideyoshi bolts upright on his futon, eyes wide with shock, yet even now, he is calculating. Cold, controlled. In seconds, Gimin is surrounded, his blade pressed to the throat of a man he can no longer kill. "So," Hideyoshi says, his voice unnervingly calm for someone who has just awakened to an assassin in his bed. The great Ishikawa Gimin finally shows his face. "I had wondered when you would come." Gammon says nothing. There is nothing left to say. He has failed, and he knows well what failure means in the House of Power. Not just death. Worse, something slower, measured, designed to break not just the body, but the legend. The trial, if it can be called that, is swift and ceremonial. Jimin stands before Hideyoshi in the great audience hall of Fushimi Castle. His hands are bound, his kimono torn. Yet his posture remains proud, unbending. His head is held high, not in arrogance, but in defiance. Around them, courtiers, generals, and high-ranking officials gather in silence, eyes gleaming with morbid fascination. They know they are witnessing something rare, the fall of a man who had become myth. From his elevated dais, Hideyoshi regards his would-be assassin, and for a moment brief, almost imperceptible, his gaze carries something like respect. Here stands a man who dared, a man who came closer to killing him than any enemy before. "Ishikawa Gimin," Hideyoshi proclaims, his voice echoing across lacquered walls and polished stone. "You are charged with robbery, sedition, and the attempted assassination of the rightful ruler of Japan. How do you plead?" Gimon's answer, according to those who bore witness that day, was delivered with unwavering conviction and defiance that shook the hall. He met Hideyoshi's gaze without fear. His voice was steady, even as death loomed. "I plead guilty to every word," he said. "I have stolen from the rich and given to the poor. I have defied the lords who crush the common folk beneath their feet. And yes, I tried to kill you." He took a breath, not to steady himself, but to let the weight of his words settle over the room. "Because you," he continued, "are a tyrant. A man who has forgotten that power is meant to serve, not to subjugate." A ripple of gasps swept the chamber. No one had ever dared speak to Hideyoshi in this way, not even his enemies in war. But Gimin wasn't finished. "If these are crimes, then I die proud to be a criminal." "Are we going to die tomorrow, Papa?" The words are soft, almost a breath, but they strike harder than any sword ever could. Gimin looks down at the boy curled against him, his only son, the last ember of a life now extinguished. He does not lie. "Yes," he says, his voice barely above a whisper, "but listen to me. Dying is not the end if someone remembers why we lived." The boy's brow furrows. He's too young to understand revenge, too innocent to grasp politics or tyranny. But he understands love, and he understands fear. "Will it hurt?" Gimin hesitates. Then, wrapping his arms around his son, he answers with the only truth he can offer. "Yes, but only for a moment. After that, we'll be free." They sit together in silence, father and child in the shadow of dawn. Outside, the city of Kyoto stirs. Officials prepare the square. Soldiers heat the great iron cauldron. A crowd gathers, not all in hatred. Many are there because they've heard the stories. Because they once found rice at their doorstep when they had none. Because they know the name Ishikawa Gimin, not as a criminal, but as a savior. The execution. The next morning, under a gray sky heavy with silence, Gimin and his son are led to the execution ground. The iron cauldron looms like a demon's mouth filled with boiling oil, hissing and bubbling. It was meant to be a symbol, a deterrent, a spectacle. But for some, it will become a shrine. Gimin walks with his head high, his arms bound, his son clinging to his side. The crowd watches intense, reverent quiet. Some weep, some cannot bear to look. A few samurai, hardened by war, look away not out of cowardice, but out of respect. Hideyoshi watches from his balcony, expression unreadable. At the base of the cauldron, the guards hesitate. Even executioners have hearts, but the order has been given. There can be no mercy. Demon kneels. He gently lifts his son into his arms and whispers into the boy's ear one final time. "You're not afraid," he says, brushing a tear from the child's cheek. "You're my son." Then, with strength born of love and defiance, he steps into the boiling cauldron. They say he held his son above the surface for as long as his strength allowed, letting the oil devour his own body while trying, desperately, to spare the boy. Witnesses would later swear they saw it. The father burning, the child held aloft in trembling hands, both silent as statues until at last, Demon collapsed, his body finally yielding. The aftermath that day, the air smelled of smoke, oil, and death. But it also carried something else, legend. Word spread like wildfire. Of the thief who robbed the rich to feed the poor. Of the man who faced death without fear. Of the father who chose to suffer so his son might have one breath more. Jimon did not destroy Hideyoshi, but he wounded him in the only place a ruler cannot defend, the soul of the people. Statues would not be built in Gimon's honor, not officially, but temples whispered his name. Children passed it down like a sacred tale, and in every act of quiet defiance, every grain of stolen rice slipped into a starving hand. His spirit lived on. Justice, he had said, must be taken when it is denied. And in that boiling cauldron, it was not a man who died. It was a myth that was born. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that he is going to die for crimes he never committed, for a rebellion he never chose to join? Yes, Demon finally says, because he has always clung to the truth, even when it brings only sorrow. We are going to die tomorrow. The boy is silent for a long moment, absorbing the words with the peculiar calm children sometimes display when faced with things far beyond their understanding. Will it hurt? He asks. Demon closes his eyes, struggling to hold back tears. Yes, he replies softly. It will. Will you be with me? Yes, Demon promises, drawing his son close. I'll be with you. I'll hold you, and I won't let go no matter what happens. The boy nods, comforted by the answer. In his young mind, perhaps death seems less terrifying when it comes with the warmth of his father's embrace. That night, Demon sits in his cell, composing his Jisei no Ku, a traditional death poem meant as a final reflection on life and legacy. When he finishes, it is both a confession and a quiet defiance. Though you may boil the flesh of a thief, you cannot boil away his spirit. As long as the world knows rich and poor, thieves shall rise again. His words are not just about his own death, but about the unending struggle between those who rule and those who endure. In that poem, Demon sees himself not as a criminal, but as a simple one that no punishment, no matter how cruel, can extinguish. October 8, 1594. Nanzenji Temple. Kyoto dawn arrives both too soon and too slowly. The execution ground is already crowded. Merchants and monks, peasants and samurai. They gather from all walks of life, drawn by the morbid gravity of what is about to unfold. Death by boiling is a punishment so rare, most have only heard of it in whispers. None have seen it in their lifetime. At the center of the clearing sits a massive iron cauldron, its blackened surface slick with condensation. Steam curls from its rim, and the stench of heated oil hangs thick in the air. The fire beneath it has burned since before sunrise, feeding a heat that would kill any man within seconds. The stage is set not for justice, but for a warning. Yet for many in the crowd, it won't be Demon's end they remember. It will be his beginning. Demon and his son are brought forth in chains. The boy stays close to his father's side, his small hand gripping the folds of Gimen's robes. Around them, the crowd leans in anxious murmurs rippling through the air, a mixture of horror and fascination. Toyotomi Hideyoshi sits above them on a raised platform, his face carved from stone. He watches silently as the man who once threatened his life now prepares to face his end. The executioner steps forward, an old hand at death, his face impassive, his voice cold and detached as he describes the punishment to come. The condemned will be lowered into the cauldron feet first, so as to prolong the agony. There will be no mercy, no swift release. Gimen listens without a flicker of emotion, but his grip tightens around his son's fingers. The boy looks up, his eyes wide with fear, yet still full of trust. Even now, in the shadow of death, he believes his father will protect him. "Do you remember what I told you?" Gimen whispers, bending low. "I won't let go." The guards move to separate them, to bind the boy and lower him into the cauldron. But then, Gimen does something that will be etched into memory for generations. He lifts his son high above his head, as far as the chains will allow, desperately straining to keep the child away from the rising steam. The weight of the chains makes it nearly impossible, but Gimen's resolve gives him strength beyond reason. His muscles tremble, his shoulders scream in protest. But still he holds. Gasps ripple through the crowd. This is not how an execution is supposed to go. The condemned are meant to bow their heads, to submit, to accept their fate in silence or in tears. But Gimen is not submitting. He is defying. He is declaring. "If you must take our lives," he shouts, his voice rising above the murmurs, ringing with fury and love. "Then take mine first. Let the boy die quickly without pain." The executioner hesitates, glancing toward Hideyoshi for guidance. This was not in the script. But the warlord's expression does not change. After a long moment, he gives a single, imperceptible nod. The sentence will proceed. The chain lowers, and Gimen's feet touch the surface of the boiling oil. The effect is immediate and horrific. His body arches in agony as the scalding liquid sears through flesh and muscle. But still, he holds his son high above his head. The boy screams, whether from terror or the unbearable heat rising from below, no one can tell. Link by link, the chain descends. The oil rises to Gimen's knees, his waist, his chest. Each inch is a new level of torment, a new test of will. And yet his arms do not falter. He keeps the child raised, away from the inferno consuming his own body. The crowd watches in stunned, reverent silence. Some weep openly. Others avert their eyes, unable to bear the sight. But all understand. This is no longer an execution. It is a moment of pure devotion. A father's love made visible through unimaginable pain. When the oil reaches his neck, Gimen begins to fail. His arms tremble. The child begins to slip. And then he acts. Rather than allow his son to suffer the same drawn-out death, Gimen summons the last of his strength and plunges the boy downward, submerging him fully in one swift, merciful motion. The scream ends instantly, the boiling liquid silencing it as the child dies quickly, spared the drawn-out horror his father endures. And then through flame, through agony, Gimen lifts the boy's body once more, raising it like a flag, like a final act of defiance. Even as his own body breaks, even as death consumes him, he holds the child aloft, as if to say, "This is love. This is resistance. This is what power cannot destroy." His burned face remains visible for a moment, longer eyes locked on Hideyoshi with such searing hatred that many in the crowd later swear they felt the air turn cold. Then, finally, Gimen sinks beneath the surface. The oil stills. The spectacle ends. What was meant to be a warning, an act of terror to silence, descent becomes something far greater. The story of Ishikawa Gimen and his son spreads far beyond Kyoto, not as a tale of crime and punishment, but as a symbol of unwavering courage, of love that even death could not bend. Hideyoshi had intended to crush rebellion through fear. Instead, he created a legend. Far from erasing Gaiman's legacy, his execution elevated him, transforming a hunted outlaw into a folk hero of mythic stature. His story spread like wildfire across Japan, growing with every retelling. Gaiman ceased to be merely a man. He became a symbol of resistance against tyranny, a father's undying love, a reminder of the eternal struggle between the powerful and the powerless. The death poem he composed in his final hours, smuggled out of his prison cell, took on a life of its own. It became a quiet anthem whispered among peasants, quoted by Ronin, scribbled into the margins of secret pamphlets. In the years that followed, rebels and thieves invoked his name as a mantle. Ishikawa Gaiman became less a person and more an idea that no gallows, no cauldron, no emperor could destroy. Authorities tried to suppress the legend. They captured the pretenders. They executed the imitators, but it didn't matter. The myth had already taken root in the hearts of the people, and in that soil it grew. Even language bore his mark. The large cast-iron bathtub, once an ordinary household item, came to be known as a gaburo, a darkly ironic homage. What had been an instrument of torture became, in daily life, a symbol of cleansing and quiet resistance. And every time someone lowered themselves into hot water, they might recall the man who endured the flames, not for riches, but for justice. His tale echoed across the kabuki stage, transformed into dramas that filled theaters for generations. Artists painted him not just as a man, but as a superhuman warrior with eyes like fire and arms that could lift mountains. Writers turned his exploits into legend, crafting adventures that blurred the line between history and fantasy. And yet, behind the exaggerations, one truth remained. Gaiman chose rebellion over obedience. And though it cost him everything, he gained something far more enduring, something Hideyoshi, for all his armies and castles, could never claim: immortality. Immortality not carved into stone or written in official scrolls, but carried in whispers, in lullabies, in the sigh of a hot bath on a cold night. 4 centuries have passed since a father and his son died in a boiling cauldron on a Kyoto morning, and still their story lingers. The world has changed beyond recognition. We carry devices in our pockets that would have been unthinkable in the age of swords and scrolls. Empires have risen and fallen. The names of rulers have faded into dust. But the questions that Gaiman's life and death raise, they have not gone away. When faced with injustice, do we bow or do we rise? That, perhaps, is his final legacy. Not a call to violence, but a quiet, smoldering reminder that even in a world built by power, a single voice can still burn. Governments still proclaim themselves as the voice of the people. Laws still speak of equality, of justice for all. And yet, the same deep fault lines remain. The rich grow ever richer. The poor still scrape by. Power shields the guilty, while the powerless pay for crimes they never committed. The machinery of oppression may have changed its shape. It may now wear a suit instead of armor, speak in codes instead of commands, but it still grinds onward. And that is why the legend of Ishikawa Gaiman has not faded into dust. He is not a relic of a bygone era. He is a question still waiting for an answer. His life reminds us there are moments when the law of the land is not the law of conscience, when justice does not live in courts or scrolls, but in the aching heart, the trembling hands, the quiet courage to say, no more. But Gaiman's story is not one of triumph. It is a tragedy. He gave everything: his life, his dreams, his child. His son, an innocent, died for the name he carried, for the blood in his veins, for a rebellion he never chose. That final image haunts the soul. A father, body blistering in boiling oil, lifting his child above the flames. holding him not in surrender, but in defiance. Not to save his life, but to spare him pain. A final act of love in a world gone mad. It is an image burned into the memory of a nation. It tells us what we are capable of when we choose to protect the ones we love, and what we may have to give up in the pursuit of justice. In the end, perhaps Gaiman's true legacy isn't the thefts, not the rebellion, not the executions, but this, that there are things worth dying for, and that sometimes the deepest tragedy lies in the collision between love and principle, between the desire to shield one life and the need to fight for countless others. The man who was boiled alive with his son became more than a tale from the annals of history. He became a mirror, and in that mirror, every generation must look and ask, when the time comes, will we bow our heads, or will we stand, knowing the price? The cauldron has long since cooled, its iron walls cracked with time, but the fire that burned in Daemon's chest, still smolders, waiting for another hand to carry the flame. And in the stillness after midnight, when the world is hushed and the powerful sleep easily beneath silt and stone, some say you can still hear it. A whisper, a vow, a father's love ringing out across the centuries, defiant, unbroken, eternal.